Well, good morning. It's really great to see everybody. Great to be part of this National Festival of Co-Production. I'll be joined today by colleagues, including volunteers Val and Viv. They'll be speaking to you shortly, and from Matthew Lanham, who's one of our provider partners. First of all, if you're not familiar with the territory, Cheshire, Western Chester is that area in the northwest of the country, to the south of Liverpool, and adjacent to the Welsh and Shropshire borders. I don't know what images that conjures for you, but you may be familiar with the city of Chester, maybe less familiar with the industrial towns of Ellesmere Port, petrochemical centre, with numerous market towns, which also have an industrial heritage, but now primarily often dormitory towns to Liverpool, Manchester, to Staffordshire. With 350 square miles, a third of our population live in rural locations. The population is aging, and more than half of adults live with more than one long-term health condition. So designing and delivering a project that meets that kind of range of communities, locations, is a challenge for BrightLife, a challenge for anybody trying to design and deliver a service. But it's a great place to live and work, and we have lots of great partners. We have many super volunteers who have helped to deliver the BrightLife project, and we're really pleased to be a part of this event. I think what I want to do is to talk a little bit about how important we feel co-production is in commissioning. And we started with a philosophy and practice right from the beginning. And there was a bit of a byline along the way, which was it was for older people, by older people. And we've tried to keep that at the heart of the project all the way through. First of all, hopefully most people are aware that the Aging Better project was set up to tackle social isolation in the over 50s. It seems fairly obvious when you're commissioning, you say that it's what it's for, that providers will come to you with solutions for that. Often we had to get around people's understanding of what social isolation meant, how it factored into loneliness, why that particular age group. And 5-6 years on, people have a much better understanding than they did, and we feel we've contributed to that understanding. The aim was always to make BrightLife person-centered, and we've wanted to include people who would use any activities, attend activities, access services, to be at the heart of the way things were designed, developed, delivered. To help us achieve that, we felt in principle that we should train older people to be our commissioners, that we bring people in with lived experience. And actually we took by doing that, to take some control away from the project team, from our statutory partners, and the professionals, as you might call them, and to hand over what was a £2 million budget to a group of commissioners to allocate on behalf of the BrightLife Partnership. We broadly split our commissions into 2 areas: key commissions, of which we commissioned about 12, totaling around about 1.3 million. And that was done in a more traditional way of trying to come up with a specification based on known characteristics, issues, demographics, and appealing to providers to come forward with their ideas and solutions to meet that criteria. Separately, we developed a Bright Ideas Innovation, and co-production is very critical to this, because it was important to accept that commissioners don't always have the knowledge and the ideas about particular communities to set out the right specification. And therefore, we could say, look, we've got this issue of social isolation. You out there know your communities. Come forward to us with innovative ideas, suggestions, and sketch those out for us and bring it forward, and let's see whether that brings some common ground, that we can design new, different, interesting, imaginative approaches, and let's test out whether they work. And invited people to apply for funding on that basis, and our older people commissioners would assess those and then decide if the idea was worth allocating funds to. When we talk about diversity and our diverse communities, this very dispersed rural, urban, city geography is not one homogeneous set of people, experiences, and needs. We don't profess to have significant BAME communities, but we recognize there are people of many different ethnicities and backgrounds that make up those communities. And so we need to respond, be open to those needs. But really what we have to think about in terms of diversity is we have older people who have had very industrial experiences in terms of occupation. People have had farming and agricultural experiences. People who have been LGBTQ'd growing up in very dispersed rural communities without the support of city services and dynamics and communications. People who are isolated through geography simply, with poor access to health, poor access to transport. So we set about trying to be open to listening to people who lived in their communities, who represented particular communities of interest, and saying, yeah, come forward, share your knowledge, your expertise, and pitch your ideas to us. Our Older People's Alliance will shortly tell you about how they set about their work, and I won't steal their thunder. But I do want to talk about the co-production as being a relationship with providers. We had providers of many different kinds, providers who'd been charities and organizations used to applying for funding, delivering an activity, being professional in the approach. And they were great, and they were a really strong asset to us. But equally, we had people who hadn't really applied for funding before, or we used to a very grant-based approach rather than a contractual approach. And we worked with our partners, with the support of our voluntary sector organizations, to help people to be in a position to apply for funding. And from that, we were able to identify projects which met needs of, for example, our agricultural chaplaincy, reaching out to isolated people in the farming community, providing social networks, people representing our hearing impaired community, our LGBTQ dispersed community, and so on and so forth. We'll tell you where you can find information on the particular projects and providers. But in essence, what we wanted to do was to enable, facilitate, and support providers to come forward, not to be too antagonistic, gladiatorial in our approach to commissioning, but to facilitate people to put in good proposals, and once they develop proposals, to help make those stronger in terms of an implementation plan, a sustainability plan. And our contractual relationship, once we'd accepted bids, was to challenge and support in equal measure. We wanted them to test themselves. We wanted them to deliver the goods, to achieve outcomes, but equally, we knew that you don't get innovation without risk. And we tried to balance our understanding and our relationship. We had good support from our statutory partners, and our older people volunteers were involved every step of the way in that relationship with providers. Most of all, we knew part of our role was to gather learning, to harvest evidence about things that worked and also things that didn't work. And that's why we're really pleased to be part of this toolkit, developing a national resource that other people can tap into, not just about working with older people, not just about addressing isolation, but really looking at how to do things differently, how to put co-production at the heart of everything that you do. And we see it as part of our legacy, part of our responsibility to share that. And when you access the toolkit, you'll see lots of Bright Life learning and evidence as part of that. I'm going to film now from our Older People's Alliance. The Bright Life Older People's Alliance are a group of older people volunteers who play a big part in making all the decisions about how the projects run. We needed people who understood the issues for older people, but also understood how to make organisations work, how to spend money wisely and intelligent, and above all of them have got that lived experience.
For many years I'd been a member of the Older People's Network, and we had discussed the loneliness and isolation of older people who can't get out of their homes. And so I was hoping that when Bright Life came into being, it would actually solve the problem.
Once we started with the OPA, it was a tremendous experience because so many people had worked with older people, were there, but they were also all older people. So they understood what Bright Life was really all about.
4 years down the line, it's so successful. And now these people are being referred by their doctors to Bright Life, who are doing a fantastic job.
I had a career in local government, so I ended up as a director of a local authority, and then I retired about 10 years ago. I did a lot of commissioning work, so we were responsible for the full range of commissioning, preparing contract documentation, doing interviews and then monitoring contracts and so on. So although they were a different sort of contract, I think that was probably a good experience that I could help the team with.
Before this, actually, I'd done 22 years in European policy and funding, and prior to that I'd been dealing with marketing. So the mixture of those two, the ability to actually look at projects critically and see exactly what we thought needed to be done actually for the older people in the area, and the marketing, trying to actually move this through, get the message out that older people have a lot to give.
My professional experience, which goes back rather a long way, is primarily to do with the commissioning of buildings. To be able to use those skills again for the benefit of other people, this building here particularly for our community here in Weaverham, it's just great, and I just keep going.
It helps us all as older people to keep active mentally and physically, which also gives us a greater sense of well-being.
I've enjoyed working with the small group of people that have made up the OPA, and also having an insight into some of the fantastic work that people are doing out there in the community. It's been really amazing, actually.
Granting the money that was allocated from the lottery to these providers that had presented what they were wanting to do but had lack of funds, that was very rewarding, feeling you're giving something to society and you can see it develop.
So at this point, we're going to hand over to Val Pasley and Viv G. They're part of that group who had responsibility for a £2 million budget, which they've spent, and there is no more to be spent, but they're really keen to share their experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Val. I was encouraged to get involved in Bright Life by a friend. She and I had worked together on the board of a care organisation, and she had been a part of the team that had successfully bid to the lottery. And she told me how important it was that older people played a central role in Bright Life. Viv will tell you how she was able to use her previous professional experience in commissioning. I had no commissioning experience, but as a result of some really very good training provided by Bright Life, I learned a new skill set and had the opportunity to take part in the commissioning process. So the process started with us reading and assessing the information from potential providers. A panel made up of OPA members would meet and question them about the activities they could provide. All applicants were asked to explain how people were involved in the design of their project, what people had told them, and how it helped to shape their project. After the initial round of commissioning, we decided to change our approach from seeking providers who could deliver a specific service to inviting them to tell us what they could offer to meet our objectives and the different communities, the needs of their different communities. This was one of the ways we learned about the views of the different communities to inform our decisions about which projects to fund. Once the contract was agreed, we would get regular progress updates at meetings, and we also took part in contract meetings with providers. One of the projects I worked with was Silver Rainbows, which was set up to support older LGBT people. I joined them for their first practice when they had decided to set up a choir, which subsequently became very successful and self-sustaining. Another project I worked with was the Neuromuscular Centre, and Matthew will tell you later how they embraced co-production in the design and the delivery of their project. So what did we learn? We learnt many things from our commissioning experience, but I just want to mention how we worked with the Bright Life Partnership. The OPA were active members of the partnership, as Chris has described actually, and we attended all the meetings. When it was first explained that we would be responsible for commissioning, there was concern from a few of the professionals. I think the question really was, were we really up to the job? After the first cycle of commissioning, our decisions were presented to the partnership and some of them were rejected. This was quite a critical point in the whole project. OPA members were understandably angry and upset, and it led to the resignation and loss of a valuable member. This was clearly a governance issue, which had to be resolved to establish the OPA's right to decide and award contracts, and that the role of the partnership was to scrutinise and advise, but not overturn. As time went on, the partnership came to support us and to respect and value highly the work we did. So now I'm going to hand over to Viv.
Hello everyone. I thought I'd start by telling you how I got into Bright Life. I've been retired for a year and have been invited to the Bright Life launch as I was on the committee of the Cheshire Older People's Network. I sat next to the marketing manager, and as I had previous marketing experience, I was invited to join the marketing committee. This led to me becoming the chair of the Bright Life Older People's Alliance, the OPA, and becoming involved in co-production and commissioning. And this meant I was able to build on the previous experience of, as I mentioned before, the European project commissioning and assessment that I'd had, and so was delighted to be able to keep on with that and develop those skills via Bright Life. Val's told you about the OPA's involvement in the commissioning process, and I'd just like to add a few more random thoughts. First, on the project applications. The test and learn system, which meant we could react quickly to things and change things quickly, really showed its worth when OPA realised that the key commissioning application form needed tweaking. One major change driven by OPA was to put the summary of the project at the beginning of the form, as previously we found that you could get through the form and not really have any real idea of what the project was actually going to do. Also, during the panel interviews, OPA would drill down and establish sustainability and suitability. Now, on sustainability, we really wanted this embedded on the projects from day one, because this usually gets left to the last minute and panic sets in about how a project can continue once funding ends. And also, I think that some applicants thought that as we were older people, that they would get an easy ride. No such luck. We were determined to get good projects for the older people in Cheshire West and made sure that we got the information we needed to enable us to do just that. So some project applications were very much that dash for cash, with applicants trying to carry out their own agendas rather than Bright Life's objectives. OPA members were easily able to spot this, and it was made very clear that funding would not be given on that basis. However, we did have one big organisation that once the project got going, they wanted to go off in their own sweet way, and so OPA supported Bright Life in instigating a parting of the ways. And on contract management, during contract management and visits to projects, we needed to be mindful of not treading on the toes of the contract manager. We were often asked for advice on how to deal with things during those visits. And so to be very clear that this was not our role, as it could have caused problems with contract management and the law. This wasn't always easy, as inevitably we did have ideas and thoughts that we could contribute, but we held fire and talked to the contract manager about what the issues were so that they could deal with them. And finally, as far as OPA representation goes, every effort was made to ensure that OPA was broadly representative of the Cheshire West 50+ demographics. However, we did recognise that we couldn't represent all older people. And so a wider community consultation to identify needs in which OPA were involved was undertaken. However, being older people ourselves meant that we did have a handle on the issues that older people face around social isolation and loneliness. And in fact, being involved in OPA meant that we were addressing our own feelings of these issues by seeing the projects in action and meeting participants. So it was a learning and involving experience for us also, and very rewarding. Thank you.
Right, at this point then, we're going to move to Matthew, who represents an amazing facility and more importantly, an amazing community based in the middle of Cheshire, the Neuromuscular Centre. We've got a little film just to preface that, which will, pictures, play 1,000 words, and then Matthew will pick up on some of the co-production experience and challenges and views that he has. So we'll look at that film.
The Neuromuscular Centre is a charity, and we've been here for 30 years. We support people who've got neuromuscular conditions. Those are muscle wasting conditions, generally genetic and inherited. We support them with their physical health, with a physiotherapy service. We've got a gym where people can come and be as active as possible. We've got a print and design company that is a social enterprise that works within the charity. We've got a training centre where people can do vocational courses or more hobby type courses. The whole place is glued together by humour and fun and positivity and friendship.
I've been coming about 5 years. It's very relaxed. We have a lot of fun because we've a lot of banter going on with different people. Without it, I certainly wouldn't be as mobile as I am now. I really appreciate being able to come here.
It's a real family atmosphere, community, everybody helps each other. I think it's going on for 16 years that I've been using the centre, and I know I definitely would not be walking now if I didn't come here.
People don't just come here for physio, or they don't just come here for hydrotherapy. They can actually socialise, meet new people, and so they become less isolated.
Bright Life were amazing because they gave us the opportunity to add that social strand to our work. We created projects to connect people within our community. People were given the opportunity to run workshops to share their knowledge with other people who are affected by neuromuscular conditions.
The Connect Up project is funded by Bright Life, and it's all about bringing people with a long-term or neuromuscular condition together to try and reduce social isolation amongst people over 50. Having that sort of social network is really important to both reduce the feelings of isolation, but also to enable people to learn new skills, reconnect with new people, and just share their experiences of life.
The centre has all sorts of people from all walks of life that have experiences of muscular dystrophy. It's not the negative place you might expect it to be, it's just wonderfully positive. People are helpful, friendly, and at the centre there is a massive sense of community spirit.
So we're going to hand over to Matthew directly now. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Lynn. I don't think in my time with the Neuromuscular Centre, which is 16 years, we've had quite such a coming together of of culture and ethos with a funder, as we did with Bright Life. And being asked to speak today and talking in preparation with Chris for today, I've reflected a lot. And I guess it's our shared belief in co-production that meant that our relationship was so productive. And when I say easy, I don't mean undemanding, I just mean we were on the same wavelength. All that said, when I first kind of read the phrase, the word co-production, I balk. You know, my immediate reaction is, well, you mean there's an alternative? You know, in what crazy world would people be so patronizing as to create projects, events, services, whatever it might be, in the belief that they're somehow more professional than the people for whom these things are directed at. And so, you know, it's not a phrase that sits easily with me. It's a culture and ethos that I can't imagine an alternative to, though. So I hope that makes sense. You'll have seen in the film NMC's population of folk, and that probably we're at the younger end of the over 50s, and that I think was an interesting part of our work, and probably gave it, you know, slightly different complexion. We were often talking about people for whom their condition had meant they'd had to give up work early, and were still in quite raw from that experience, but with lots to give. So I prefer respect your fellow human rather than co-production. That's my point. We were, I think, using the principles of co-production throughout, really. So right from the very conception of a project, and thinking, well, how are we going to approach this? We are by nature the kind of organization that's involving. We are a team of staff team. Half of the staff team are people who have muscular dystrophy. Half of my managers, you know, we're blended all the way through. And so it's kind of our nature to be talking about how might we do a new project together. But in this case, the big deal was that we, for the first time, were going to open up a whole strand of social connecting activities that previously had only occurred by chance. Now they were going to occur by design. And so what was that design? It quickly emerged that people in our community, as I'm sure would be replicated in those that you're more familiar with, have got a heck of a lot of skills. And we sort of brainstormed down a load of ideas for workshops that people in our community could run, for example. Because that was the way we were thinking. That this isn't about providing an entertainment or a stimulus from outside our community. This was about drawing out the skills and strengths of people who came here affected by muscular dystrophy. But this little brainstorm gave us the following potential workshops. How to make Christmas cards, fossil hunting, photography, how to plant and nurture sunflowers, dealing with difficulties swallowing and adapting your diet accordingly. Yeah. The range was quite extraordinary. So you've got mutual support stuff, you've got learning new skills stuff, and the fact that there was to be co-production meant that people felt needed. And isn't that the key to so much in life? And haven't we just learnt that in the last year so much? It never crossed my mind that the project manager for this within NMC would not be somebody who themselves had a neuromuscular condition. And we are, as I speak, we're on our second project manager since this began. Both have been people with a neuromuscular condition, the latter being Sarah, who you saw speak at the end in the film. We became intertwined with Bright Life on another level. You heard about our graphic design and print business. And because we understood each other's ethoses so well, it was quite natural, I think, that Bright Life themselves started to use our own graphic design company for their own printing and design needs. And that, to me, added another level of co-production and mutual understanding. The legacy of Bright Life is something I just want to finish with, really, for our charity. So when we began this process, we were physio, training, social enterprise, and support on things like equipment. We now have social, friendship, rewarding opportunities for everybody in our community, because post Bright Life, we've brought that to be everybody of all ages in our community, because there were, and we've got that now as a big part of what we do, and it's part of everyday life. And God knows where we would have been over the last 12 months if it hadn't been for where Bright Life had brought us to, because most of what we've been doing over the last 12 months has been keeping people's head above water, keeping people bobbling along through social activities, through friendship, through stimulation, online workshops, and it has been a lifesaver for people in the last period. So I hope it's given you a flavour, and I'm very happy to talk about more themes or elements of what we've done in the question and answer session that follows. But thank you for the opportunity to talk a little about NMC and our relationship with Bright Life, and how co-production was right at the core of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. That's really insightful. I think for those people unfamiliar with the Aging Better programme, the whole ethos was about test and learn. What could we be innovative with? What could we do differently? What works, what doesn't work? And we're really pleased to be part of this National Production Toolkit, because it enables us to pass on a lot of our resources and practices and ideas into a toolkit which will have some longevity and application generically beyond our own initial target group, over 50s and social isolation. And that body of learning has come from people like the Older People's Alliance, from this network of providers, over 50 providers that we work with, from the Bright Life team delivering all aspects of the programme. And I'm conscious that one of our commissioning managers who helped to review, adapt, design the programme, Mandy, is here. She's taken forward some of that learning into the lottery and the way they're doing things. So we're offering now some top tips. I'll just comment on some of these, but these are amongst the kind of resources that you find in the toolkit if you go to it. So if we can go through that first block, first of all, volunteer commissioners work. And you can take that in two ways. One, you can put them to work and they work really hard, but actually because they want to, their vested interest is in what's right for their community, not what's right for an organization or a business. and they have a distance from some of those pressures that as the funding body that we might experience. But they work because they do have that reach into communities. They do have that lived experience. They bring things to you that even in a well-established team within a local authority, clinical conditioning group, or project like ours, that you can't always have yourselves. Secondly, I mentioned all the ears and the eyes out in the community. I don't think we would have got all of our projects like the Sparkle Cafe for the hearing impaired, the Fab Weld using retired welders to train other older people and young people. We wouldn't have had our Silver Rainbows LGBT community and choir. We wouldn't have had those if we'd have set out a straightforward specification. We wouldn't have addressed some of the gaps that were there, like trying to encourage men to come into projects. So all, the ideas, the imagination is outside. The challenge is one to get people to articulate it, to present it, and to shape it. And if you're genuine about co-production, you can help and encourage and facilitate that. And our approach with contract management was always to review and to adapt, not to say you said you'd deliver this, you stick to that. What are the outcomes? Have you met your performance indicators? If not, there's knocking this off your budget. It was always to try and find a way forward and to adapt in time. We did get to the point, as Viv highlighted, with some providers where we had to say, actually, you're not working in the right way. Let's agree to part. I think that's the polite way of expressing it. And there's a message there about size. Sometimes you think you can have confidence that a large established provider will be the most capable of delivery and the most capable of ideas. I think what we discovered are our biggest failures were with the biggest and most established organizations, and our best successes sometimes were with the smaller, innovative, local people who could adapt, wanted to respond, could move more quickly and easily. We'll have the next block. I think co-production isn't just about the spec and the delivery, it's all aspects. I think we involved older people and we encouraged providers to think about their participants when looking at marketing and also in evaluation, to build an evaluation from the start, which captures the views of people participating. We also use co-researchers in far more formal evaluations. But I come back to this key message of a support and challenge relationship. I think, as Matthew said, not a soft touch, but one where you can have an open, honest discourse about what works, what's needed, what doesn't work, how you change, and so on. Some more general things. We often found with our projects, if you said, here's a project for sad, lonely people, for some reason or other, people didn't turn up to that. They were more interested in something that was based on an activity or an interest or a shared moment of some sort. And again, co-production and sustainability planning is really critical. I think we find lots of organizations think about sustainability when they get to the end of the project. What we tried to do was encourage, challenge our providers to build in sustainability from the start. And to have sustainability plans. And that included thinking about our funding is going to end. That was a healthy thing for us. We're not saying we're going to be here in 10 years' time. You can come back to us for more money in a few years. It's going to end. We want to know how you're going to survive afterwards and how you can sustain yourself rather than just be a cliff edge. And co-production with participants and potential participants is critical. Are they willing to pay? Can they pay? Can you use volunteers to deliver the activities? Are there other sources of funding? How do you do that? So sustainability embedded right from the beginning. And again, I'll come back. Our support approach was about us as a team. It was about our providers. We had a partner organisation, our voluntary sector infrastructure organisation, Cheshire West Voluntary Association, who we commissioned to provide independent support and independent network so they could have conversations and build connections outside of the relationship with us as a commissioner. And that proved a very healthy relationship too. So I think then we move on to the next slide. And I think we're about bang on time, which, considering my amateurish handling of Zoom at the start, is a success in itself, based on test and learn in over 45 minutes. Yeah, we're contributing a lot to this toolkit because we believe in our legacy. We believe, we don't think they've got the perfect model for commissioning, but we think people can dip in and out of different resources, and we're happy to be part of that body of evidence. We've got top tips on our contracts and commissioning, our volunteering, our amazing marketing strategies. I say that because I didn't do it, but the people who know what they're doing did. And our social prescribing, which was a very successful workshop yesterday. But a whole host of other resources are going into there. But you can also access our own website, which will be there on the slides. And linked into that is all the formal learning reports for those who have an appetite for the academic side of things, some of the individual reflections of providers, video testimony from participants, from providers, from partner organisations. We have our own YouTube channel, and you'll see some of the stars you've seen today featured in many of the films there. But lots of our providers, so if you're looking for ideas of different kinds of activities, even there it's a really good source. Podcast too, we have our own legacy reports. So some of these will go into the National Toolkit, and we have other stuff on our website. So at this point, we're going to take a break. I want to thank people for attending. Again, we'll take a few moments break and then we'll come back. I know people have been posting comments in the chat, and there'll be other questions possibly coming, and we'll open up the mics where it's relevant and helpful so people can have their own voice and speak directly to the panel or to each other.
I'd like to invite anybody who'd like to ask a question to raise their hands. You do that through the reactions bar at the bottom, and just raise a hand. Would anybody like to, I've just got one question in the chat, but would anybody like to start us off? Anybody like to raise a hand? Okay, I'll pick up something from Anna in the chat. Just bear with me. This is from Anna. Excellent range of expertise provided by the OPA. Great to see the key decision makers. And she has to go. So I think with the OPA, thank you for that, Anna. And one of the things that I think we just wanted to maybe pick up a little bit more was probably a question to Val or Viv about the relationship that I think you both touched on between the statutory partners and the volunteer commissioners, and particularly at the beginning, more at the beginning of Bright Life. How did that relationship work? How did you get the statutory partners to come on board with you being volunteer commissioners? I don't know if Val or Viv would like to pick that up.
Do you want to go, Viv?
Yeah, fine, thanks. I think really the main thing that we did was we realised that we had to gain their confidence and their trust. And so we did a mini skills audit, which actually gave people something they could look at to see what our background and experience had been. And I think that really helped. You know, we weren't just a bunch of old dears sitting in a corner. We had actually had professional experience, and we could actually make the right decisions. But as Val sort of said, it wasn't always easy. And again, Val, I don't know whether you'd like to pick up on that.
No, I think we had to demonstrate that we were going to be good at what we did to develop the trust with the partnership. And I think that's what we did. You know, we obviously, as time went on, things improved, and actually at the end, as I said when I was speaking before, we had some fantastic praise and recognition from members of the partnership about the work that we've done. I noticed, Lynn, there's a question there from Gillian. Have you seen that question?
Yeah, thanks, Val. Yeah.
No. I was just going to say about how we recruited through lots of different ways, actually. I would say initially it was very much word of mouth, because I mentioned that I was brought in by a friend. There was also, Viv mentioned the Older People's Network, which was part of Cheshire West, and the number of people who'd worked together on that came to work on Bright Life. So there were a number of different ways in which we recruited. Actually, I can see Mandy's there. She knows as well about how we recruited, if she wants to say anything. Or she's gone shy for a change.
Yeah, that makes a change, doesn't it, Val?
Yeah.
I don't want to sort of jump on your bandwagon here, but yeah, if it's any help at all, then yeah, a real variety of ways, through advertising, through word of mouth, through working with networks that were already established amongst older people, working with statutory partners to get the word out there. So yeah, as many ways as we possibly could. But yeah, word of mouth did play a big part. You're right, Val.
Mm-hmm. I think one other thing I'd like to say is the fact that we were actually involved in the partnership meetings. You know, we weren't just there as observers. We were actually there and engaged, and that meant at every meeting we could throw in our 2 pennies and really sort of have good discussions about things. And also the fact that we were there, we were able to, you know, if somebody, one of the partners had a particular problem, we were able to actually address it and sort of give reasons for things and get more of an understanding of not just them of our point of view, but us of their point of view as well, which was also very, you know, very important.
Thanks, Viv. Thanks, Val. Chris?
I seem to be in lots of reactions all of a sudden. Let's take those down. I think it's important to say, when we say it wasn't plain sailing, that our project almost fell apart at a certain point. And that was because some of the stakeholders and some of the key commissioning organisations, and it was alluded to in the presentations, but Val and Viv are great diplomats, and you know, there was a point where this project could have folded because we couldn't get commissioning done, because all the work was done by the commissioning team and the Older People's Alliance, and brought great projects forward. And then some of the commissioning organisations on the partnership started to get very picky. Have you checked this out? Have you checked that out? Another vested interest started to come into play. And we had to really then have a battle. And I think at that point in time, the Older People's Alliance, one, asserted themselves, and 1 or 2 walked. We had 1 or 2 people walk away and said, this isn't going to work if we carry on in this way. We'll never get anything done. We'll never get any projects tried and tested. Our contract management team worked with the Older People's Alliance and the partnership to redesign the whole commissioning process, to come up with a whole set of new proposals, and almost to start from scratch. And from that point on, having had that battle, we made progress. We started to get things commissioned. We started to have an acceptance. The commissioning organisations then came in and almost buddied the Older People's Alliance on panels, but didn't vote, and getting them involved a bit earlier. So we learned from our experience, and I think some of those partners learned. And once they started to see some really successful projects, trust was developed. And it's a shame we couldn't have had that all the way along, but that's the truth of it. And sometimes when you're trying different things, you have to take risks. We were in a position where we could afford some failures. And the problem, I think, for a lot of commissioning organisations, they're afraid of failure. But by not risking things, nothing new comes out of it. So I think it's worth bearing those thoughts in mind.
I think it very much followed the, what's the phrase, forming, storming, norming for setting up panels and teams and all sorts of things. And I think the fact that we did have this buddying that Chris has alluded to really helped, because it meant we had a member of the partnership there when we were making the decisions, and often, you know, giving their point of view and so forth. But we were the ones in the end who made the final decision. but it meant that if there was a problem or a query coming up at the partnership, that member of the partnership could also pitch in and say, well, this happened, that happened, this is why. And so that really helped support us and the decisions that we were making.
Thank you, Viv. Gillian, come to you.
I just wanted to pick up on that point that Chris was making about things reaching a very difficult sort of juncture. And I just wondered, what had you thought in hindsight, anything that might have helped in terms of preparation work with the partners that might have avoided things getting to that stage? I mean, it may be that that might have been inevitable, that, you know, it had to kind of reach that point and work through it. But is there anything that you could identify that perhaps should have been done or could have been done with partners to maybe prepare them for this different way of working? Because clearly they were struggling with it, from what you're saying.
Val?
Can I jump in there? I think when I spoke before, I said it was a governance issue. The governance on the decision making wasn't clear. I think that was so. The people who rejected those early decisions that we made they weren't clear about what their role was. We were quite clear about ours, but they weren't clear. And I think that is the thing. Everybody has to understand where the responsibility lies, where the decision making lies. And I think if we'd been clearer about that in the first place, we wouldn't have had that problem.
I think, as well as Chris sort of mentioned, vested interests, that did rear its head on occasions. But I think it was also around people's own roles in their own organisations, that they were representing those organisations. And I think maybe they felt that you know, if they went back to that organisation and said, oh, this had happened or this had been decided, that they could have a problem, you know, within their own sort of workspace.
Thank you, Viv.
I'll just add to that. I think there was that element of a dash for cash. I think, Viv, you talked about that. And suddenly £2 million was brought into a community, and a feeling that who's controlling it, who's got it, who's deciding, is it going to the right places? And it was a new type of project. People were just not that familiar with it. There was the accountabilities that Viv's described. There's that lack of clarity in governance, which we had to revisit. It could have been avoided, possibly, but I'm not sure. And I think we also found that, not untypical, that in some of the statutory partners, there was a sense of, we've got this understanding, and then that officer moves on to another authority, and then somebody else comes in who doesn't quite have the history, and then almost you have to start again. But I think what we learned from that was actually having honest conversations, going around talking eye to eye with people and saying, for this to work, we need to have a different way forward, you know. And it evolved, it improved, it became a success. Maybe we could have avoided those, and we would learn, I think, more clearly about governance at the start. I think would have helped.
Thank you, Chris. Gillian, anything else you wanted to add, or did that cover some of your questions?
No, that covers it really well. Thank you. That's just really helpful just to explore it a bit further. So thank you for that.
Okay. I just want to turn it around a little bit, and this is probably for well, everyone on the panel really, and just thinking about the providers a little bit more. And how aware do you think that providers were at the start of Bright Life about the values and the use of co-production in commissioning? We've got one of our providers, Matthew, here, and he's talked about that co-production being very much at the heart of their organisation anyway. But I just wondered if there were views about those provider organisations and how much they knew about co-production, particularly at the start of Bright Life. Any panel member want to take that one on?
Yeah, Lynn, I think that's a really good question to reflect back to me, because I think there is learning perhaps. When we first came forward with it was a very small project under the sort of bright ideas, which was the Bright Life pots for smaller projects. I think we had at that point no real conception that co-production was something that was really embedded in Bright Life. And so our pitch would have been just like we would have pitched to any funder. We would have, you know, I'm being honest and frank, we would have read the guidelines and applied those and done a presentation accordingly. But I don't think we majored on the co-production element in that pitch. But by the time we came forward with Connect Up, our sort of bigger project, you know, we involved, there were, on our presentation team, were people who were very much part of our community. They weren't fundraisers pitching, it was very much a co-production from NMC. So by then the penny had dropped, I think. So I don't know how, I mean, again, I tend to think it's about the language. The title, it's not something when you're reading guidelines that leaps out at you and says, this is what it means. And I don't know how better to suggest that be done. But I think if you're commissioning and your co-production's a big element, somehow, some way, got to find better ways to really shout about it.
Thank you, Matthew. Any other panel member want to add to that? I can see we've got Jackie wanting to add a question, but any follow-up on that, Chris?
Yeah, I was only going to say that in revising some of our processes and the paperwork and the guidance, after the first round of commissions, we had a feeling that maybe people didn't understand. People would say, oh, we did this survey last year of 5 people or whatever, and they tell us this. And really weren't in the here and now about it, or even, you know, trying to think about co-production as jargonistic. If you say person-centered and try and evidence that, you get perhaps a clearer response. So I think we do have to manage jargon. We had briefing sessions for our providers to try and explain some of these criteria, to try and get them into a conversation with us as commissioners about it as well. And we deliberately put into the assessment framework, you know, tell us how you applied co-production principles when designing your project, how you will sustain this as the project progresses, the marking for that, how much marks it gets, and doubling the weighting on it. That tends to draw people's attention when you start to do those things to some of those changes. Thanks, Len.
Thank you, Chris. Val, did you want to add to that?
Oh no, let Jackie come in with her question. It was just a comment from me.
If you want to go, that's fine.
Am I going?
Yeah.
Go on, Val.
I'm just going to say, when I first started on Bright Life, I wasn't familiar with the concept of co-production. What I was familiar with was, oh yes, we've got to have the voice of older people. But it was a kind of token thing that I'd seen, and I just was not interested in being involved in anything. As soon as I knew we were going to have the money, I knew we were going to have power. And then I was interested. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Val. Viv, I'm going to come to you just to finish this bit, and then we'll go to Jackie.
Great, thanks. All I would say is, as I've mentioned my experience on European projects, and I can't think of one European project where we had co-production. It was always, here's a specification, this is what we want, and it was top down. So
Wow.
This was a really, brilliant experience for me. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Jackie.
Okay. So I work in Cheshire West. I support the People's Choice Group, which is a sort of self-advocacy group for people with learning disabilities, adults with learning disabilities. So we've been asked by Cheshire West Council and the Clinical Commissioning Group to help with co-production on their strategy for commissioning services within learning disabilities and people with autism. And I suppose my question is, how do you make sure that you are, I'm very aware that it can be tokenistic, and I'm very aware that I don't want it to be. How do you make sure you're involved in a co-production way rather than just a consultation way? How would you describe the difference between those two things, and how do I make sure that my group are properly involved? Yeah, that's my question.
Great question, Jackie. Thank you.
Shall I just start and then I'll pass on? I think that there's a really number of things is what is consultation and what's genuine co-production. And I think I was trying to say earlier on, as commissioners ourselves or as organisations who have commissioned or do, it's easy to say such and such a resident survey 6 years ago said this, or we've had one Zoom session which anybody was invited to, but maybe nobody went to, or that there was an extensive consultation of which 1,000 digitally connected people were able to contribute the views, but others who may be really affected weren't. I think it's how you, again, expose yourself as a commissioner to working with the potential providers who might be there to deliver the capacity, to explore that at the start and think about how do we reach and get the views and ideas, what creative ways can we adapt and include, and how can we in our specifications spell that out. That's what we're going to look for evidence and interrogate that evidence a little bit. But that's just a starter there. Happy for any other panelists to contribute.
I think it's a two-way thing as well. When you've got consultation, if you're doing consultation, then if you're feeding things back to the people who are involved and try and get that kind of dialogue going. But I know that's not always possible, particularly, if bids are time bound and that kind of thing. But the worst thing is if you do a consultation and people give their views and then they don't hear any more. So it's kind of how you get over that.
I think I would want to know who ultimately is making the decisions, because there's nothing more frustrating than you doing putting in a lot, and then somebody goes off and makes a decision that doesn't have any bearing on what you've done. And I think I'd want to be very clear who ultimately was making the decisions that you were involved in.
I think another way is making sure if you can get people physically together. Obviously, in these current times, that's not possible. But we often found that sandwiches and cake and tea, would smooth the way, and that you got people talking, and that you got people talking amongst themselves, and they would kind of spark off of each other. And so you get other things kind of coming out of it. So, rather than a paper or a computerized sort of questionnaire, that if you can physically get people in the room, you get that energy going, and then something good can come out of that.
Thank you. Jackie, does that help answer some questions?
It does. I think we're along the right lines. As an organisation, I can't imagine any other way of working than co-production. I didn't ever know it was called co-production until recently, but it's just the way we work. And yesterday we had a Zoom meeting, but we tried to have lots of different people involved in lots of different ways before the Zoom meeting, so it was almost a presentation of feedback rather than the one-off feedback session. So I think, to me, it means ongoing and making an effort to include lots of different people in lots of different ways. And also, to pick up a couple of other of your points, it's the commissioning team from the council that are actually engaging with us in this and are really great. So I think we're along the right lines. So I wanted, without knowing much about co-production, I guess I kind of do, like I say, just without realizing it was. So I think we're along the right lines. So it's been really helpful today. So thank you.
And if I could just add to that probably less than a year ago, well, no, just over a year ago, just before the pandemic hit, the council put together a new commissioning team. Myself, some of our OPA members and some of our providers went along and a training session to the whole commissioning team of the council. So we hope that encourages people to think about the issues. And we know it's a challenge financially for funding authorities at the moment. We know it's a challenge in terms of priorities, but I think in a crisis, if you co-produce, you've got more of a chance of success than if you make decisions based on what your instinct tells you.
Thank you.
It's surely about honesty in the commissioner, isn't it? It's saying these are the parameters, these are the givens, these are, I must do this. Now, is there enough leeway left in specifying something? I'm sort of drawing on your example, Jackie. Is there enough leeway that constitutes co-production, or is it already in quite a narrow tunnel, so that really you're going through the motions, lip service, the things you were sort of fearful of? But it sounds like you're having a good experience, which is great. But I think no harm to keep testing the commissioner, is it? No harm to keep saying, persuade me that's not lip service. And of course, it's not all about the lip service end of the equation. We've not really talked about it, but it could be the other, which is complete abdication. So co-production's kind of down the middle there, isn't it? With abdication of responsibility and saying, well, you guys sort this out. I don't really want to be involved in it. Right across to, well, I've already decided, but I fancy calling this co-production, but I'm not even really consulting.
Yeah, I think the signs are that we have got a really good working relationship. So.
Brilliant.
And we make sure to feed back as well. It's not just a Zoom meeting and then nothing. We're feeding back as to what difference it's making, and that's coming from the team. So yeah, it's really great. Thank you.
I think it comes back to that phrase that often bandied about, but I think is very true, is nothing for us without us.
Yeah.
Simple as that, really.
Thank you, Viv. Are there any more questions? Comments? Okay. I think if there's anything else from the panelists, happy to have that. If not, we'll finish the Q&A. I can tell Chris might want to say something to finish the session. So if I hand over to you, Chris, and then we can close up.
Yeah, no, before, I think in a moment they show one or two slides about the rest of the festival, very, very briefly. Other than that, just to thank people for coming along and sharing their experiences and putting forward the questions. And it's great to see people who are interested in following these approaches. And do check out the Bright Life website if you wish to, and the National Toolkit. Lynn, will be launched when?
Yeah, so I'm just going to share screen very briefly. So the National Toolkit, that the co-production festival and the Aging Better teams across the country have been working on. So I understood there were some places left this afternoon. You haven't got very long to grab a quick lunch, that's at 1:30, but you'll know that the Festival of Co-Production runs across some subsequent weeks as well. So if you've missed out on the National Toolkit launch, then you can go to one of those sessions, and then anybody who's participated in any of the sessions this week will get the details of the toolkit. And all the work that's gone into that, I think will be really useful for things around people wanting to do more co-production. And then finally, just a little bit there about a couple of other sessions that are running. There's a session this afternoon, Network and Natter, and then there's the End of Reflections and Celebration tomorrow at 12:15. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you.